A scream echoes through a darkened chamber. Candles flicker. A woman's hands, stained with blood, pull an heir into the world. One mistake here, and England falls. These women held the fate of kings in their grip. They delivered every Tudor baby. Yet history erased their names. Before we reveal what happened when they failed, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you love dark history like this, hit subscribe. Your history-obsessed friends need to see this too. Now, let's step into the chamber where dynasties lived or died. London, 1486. Behind the thick stone walls of Winchester Castle, a woman kneels beside the bed of Elizabeth of York, England's new queen. The room is suffocating windows sealed shut, tapestries blocking every draught, candles casting long shadows across the floor. Elizabeth clutches her swollen belly, her face twisted in pain. This is her first child. The future of the Tudor dynasty rests on what happens in the next few hours. The woman beside her is not a doctor, not a priest, not even nobility. She is a midwife. And in this moment, she is the most powerful person in England. Her name might have been Alice Massey, or perhaps someone else entirely. History didn't bother to write it down. But what we do know is this: without her, there would be no Tudor England, no Henry VIII, no Elizabeth I, no dynasty at all. Just another failed royal bloodline swallowed by time. These women lived in the cracks of history. They moved through the most sacred, most terrifying moments of royal life, yet left behind almost nothing. No portraits, no grand tombs. Just occasional mentions in expense ledgers where kings paid them for services rendered. A few coins, a pension if they were lucky. Then silence. But make no mistake, they held a power that nobles could only dream of. With one hand on the belly of a queen and the other practically touching the crown itself, these midwives controlled whether dynasties rose or crumbled. A live heir meant stability, wealth, celebration. A dead one meant whispers of curses, accusations of witchcraft, and sometimes civil war. Think about it. Every single Tudor monarch, from Arthur, the Golden Prince who died too young, to Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen who ruled for 45 years, passed through the hands of women whose names we will never know. They were the first to touch royalty, the first to see if an heir would live or die, the first to know if England had a future. And they saw everything: the blood, the screams, the stillborn sons wrapped in linen and buried in unmarked graves. The queens who survived and the queens who didn't. They witnessed the most intimate failures and the most desperate prayers of the most powerful people in the realm. Yet when the chroniclers wrote their histories, these women vanished. The kings got their chapters. The queens got their tragedies. But the midwives? They were ghosts, invisible, forgotten, erased, until now. Among the shadows, one name survived: Alice Massey. She wasn't born into privilege. No royal blood ran through her veins. But by the time Elizabeth of York became queen, Alice had earned something far more valuable than a title or reputation. Word spread through the corridors of Westminster and the streets of London alike. Alice Massey had never lost a royal baby. Not one. In an age where childbirth was a death sentence as often as it was a blessing, that record was nothing short of miraculous. 1 in 3 women knew someone who had died bringing a child into the world. Infection, hemorrhage, exhaustion, death lurked in every delivery room. But Alice's hands were steady. Her knowledge, passed down through years of apprenticeship and countless births, made her indispensable. When Elizabeth of York's labor pains began that September night in 1486, it was Alice who was summoned. The Queen's attendants prepared the chamber according to ancient ritual, but it was Alice who would guide the child from darkness into light. Hours passed. The Queen's cries echoed off stone walls. Then finally, a baby's wail pierced the silence. Arthur Tudor, the boy who would be king. Except he wouldn't. Arthur would die at 15, leaving his younger brother Henry to inherit the throne instead. But that tragedy lay years in the future. On that night, Alice Massey had delivered England's hope. She had pulled the heir to the Tudor dynasty into the world, alive and screaming. And she wasn't done. Elizabeth would go on to have more children. Some lived, some didn't. But each time the Queen felt the first pangs of labor, Alice was there. By the time Henry VII rewarded her in 1504 with an annuity from the lordship of Cockham, Alice had attended multiple royal births. Her payment wasn't just for one successful delivery. It was for years of service, for discretion, for keeping the most powerful women in England alive when their bodies threatened to betray them. But here's what makes Alice's story so haunting. We know she existed. We know she was paid. We even know she had that perfect record Elizabeth of York trusted no one else. Yet we don't know what she looked like. We don't know where she trained or who taught her. We don't know if she had children of her own or if she ever felt fear when a queen's labor went on too long. All we know is that she succeeded where so many others failed. And in the brutal calculus of Tudor England, that was enough to earn her a footnote in history. But only barely. February 1503, the Tower of London. Elizabeth of York is pregnant again. She's 37 years old, now ancient by the standards of childbirth in her time. She's already given England multiple heirs. Arthur is gone, taken by sweating sickness 2 years earlier, but Henry remains. Strong, healthy. The succession is secure. But kings always want more sons. Insurance against fate's cruelty. So Elizabeth enters her confinement once more. The rituals repeat themselves, the sealed chamber, the attendants, the prayers. But this time, Alice Massey isn't there. Perhaps she's too old now. Perhaps she's already dead. We don't know. What we do know is that another midwife takes her place. A woman from London, skilled enough to be entrusted with a queen's life. Skilled enough, but not lucky enough. The baby comes on February 2nd, Candlemas Day. A daughter. The court records don't even bother to name her. In a world obsessed with male heirs, this little girl is barely worth mentioning. She survives the birth, but only just. Within days, perhaps hours, she's gone. Elizabeth of York holds her dying daughter and knows something is wrong. The fever comes slowly at first, then the chills. Her body, already weakened from years of pregnancies, begins to fail. The midwife can do nothing now. This isn't a problem of positioning or technique. This is infection spreading through the queen's blood, invisible and unstoppable. 9 days after giving birth, on her own birthday, Elizabeth of York dies. The records show the midwife was paid from the royal coffers. Her fee was settled, her duties fulfilled, but her name? Lost, erased, swallowed by time like so many others. We know she existed only because someone had to record the expense. Money leaving the treasury. Payment for services rendered to a queen who would never recover. Did she feel guilt, this unnamed woman? Did she replay the birth in her mind, searching for the moment where something went wrong? Or did she understand what everyone in that era understood, that sometimes no amount of skill could save a woman from the dangers lurking in her own body? Henry VII mourned his wife. The court dressed in black. Poets wrote elegies. But the midwife simply disappeared back into the streets of London, carrying the memory of a queen's final moments with her. And that's the cruelest part. These women witnessed history's most intimate tragedies. They held queens as they labored. They caught princes and princesses as they entered the world. They saw the exact moment when royal bloodlines continued or ended. But history didn't see them. They were paid, then forgotten. Their knowledge died with them, passed on only to the next generation of midwives, who would also remain nameless. An endless cycle of invisible women, holding the fate of England in their blood-stained hands. January 1536. Greenwich Palace. Anne Boleyn feels the familiar stirring in her womb. She's already given Henry VIII one daughter, Elizabeth. But what the king wants, what he's already broken with Rome to obtain, is a son. This pregnancy is Anne's last chance to secure her position. Her enemies circle like wolves. Every kick from the child inside her is a promise. Every day that passes is a countdown. Then, on the 29th of January, everything collapses. The midwife is summoned in haste. Not for a celebration, but for a crisis. Anne is losing the baby. The woman arrives to find the queen in agony, her face pale, her hands clutching at bedsheets. There's nothing to be done now, except guide the inevitable. The baby comes too early. A boy, malformed, lifeless, and the midwife sees everything. She sees the shape of the child clearly male, clearly wrong. She sees Anne's horror. She hears the frantic whispers of the attendants. She knows, in that moment, that this is more than a medical tragedy. This is a political execution waiting to happen. Within months, Anne Boleyn will be accused of adultery, witchcraft, and treason. Her head will roll on Tower Green, and the midwife who witnessed that January miscarriage, she'll be hastily dismissed, sent away with orders to stay silent. Because midwives didn't just deliver babies. They collected secrets. They knew which queens struggled to conceive. They knew which pregnancies ended in blood-soaked sheets and which produced healthy heirs. They knew when royal children were born with deformities that would be hidden from public record. They saw moments of weakness, desperation, and failure that could destroy reputations if spoken aloud. In the rigid world of Tudor politics, that knowledge was dangerous. A careless word from a midwife could spark rumors. Whispers about a queen's fertility could undermine a marriage. Testimony about a miscarriage could be twisted into accusations of sin or divine punishment. These women moved through the most vulnerable moments of royal life, and their silence was expected, demanded, enforced. That's why they were paid well, not just for their skill, but for their discretion. A midwife who attended a queen's failed pregnancy and spoke of it publicly would find herself ostracized, maybe worse. Loyalty meant keeping your mouth shut, even when you'd witnessed something that could change the course of history. So they stayed quiet. They took their payments and returned to the shadows. They carried the weight of royal tragedies inside them, never speaking, never writing, never leaving behind any record of what they'd truly seen. And when they died, those secrets died with them. The chronicles recorded the births and deaths of kings, the marriages and executions of queens. But the midwives who stood at the center of it all, who knew the truth behind the public narratives, they vanished like smoke, until all that remained were ghosts in the margins of expense ledgers. Picture this. You're a queen of England, 8 months pregnant, and the time has come. Not for the birth, not yet, but for something almost as terrifying. The ritual they call taking to chamber. It begins with a ceremony. Prayers are spoken. Priests bless you with holy water. The court gathers to wish you well, knowing some of them may never see you alive again. Then the doors close behind you, and you enter a world where men are no longer allowed. The chamber has been transformed into something that feels more like a tomb than a room. Every window is shut tight and covered with heavy tapestries, even in the scorching heat of summer. Fresh air is considered dangerous as superstition, older than anyone can remember. The only light comes from candles, their flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Curtains are drawn around the bed, thick and suffocating. Herbs smolder in braziers, filling the air with smoke meant to ward off evil spirits and disease. The smell is overwhelming lavender, rosemary, something acrid you can't quite name. Your eyes water. Your lungs struggle with each breath. This is where you'll spend the next month, maybe longer if the baby takes its time. No husband, no male physicians, no priests unless you're actively dying, and need last rites. Just you, your female attendants, and somewhere in the shadows, the midwife. Waiting, watching, preparing. The isolation is deliberate. This is women's work, and men have no place here. Even the most powerful king in Christendom must wait outside, pacing the corridors, powerless to help or hinder what happens beyond that closed door. Anne Boleyn took to chamber at Greenwich Palace in August 1533, a month before Elizabeth was born. Catherine of Aragon endured it repeatedly, hoping each time for the son she could never deliver. Jane Seymour entered her confinement knowing the weight of expectation crushing down on her. Produce a male heir or risk everything. And in each case, the atmosphere was the same. Oppressive, claustrophobic, dark. The women who attended these queens tried to make the space comfortable. Cushions on chairs, fine linens on the bed. But no amount of luxury could hide the fear that permeated every corner of that sealed room. Childbirth was a trial by ordeal, and everyone knew it. The midwife moved through this gloom like a priestess preparing for a sacred rite. She checked the queen daily, felt the position of the baby, offered advice on what to eat, how to rest, when to walk. She became the one constant in a month of waiting, the voice of experience in a place where death was always one complication away. And when the labor pains finally began, when the queen's water broke and the real ordeal started, the midwife stepped forward from the shadows. Now her work truly began. The contractions start. The queen grips the bedpost, her knuckles white, and the midwife reaches not for medical instruments, but for stones. Amber, sard, jasper. She rubs them against the queen's thighs in slow, deliberate circles. The stones are warm from being kept close to the fire. Ancient texts promise they'll speed the birth, ease the pain, protect mother and child from harm. Whether anyone truly believes, it doesn't matter. This is how it's always been done. Next come the amulets. Small pouches containing fragments of parchment inscribed with prayers, or bits of coral believed to hold power. The midwife places them on the queen's swollen stomach, arranging them just so. Each one is supposed to attract the baby downward, coaxing it toward the world. Then the herbs. Coriander is crushed and applied to the skin. The smell is sharp, almost medicinal. The theory is that it draws the child out, though no one can explain exactly how. But in a world without ultrasounds or epidurals, hope and tradition are the only medicines available. If the labor drags on, if hours pass and the baby refuses to come, the methods grow stranger. The midwife might prepare a poultice, rose water mixed with bizarre ingredients. Sometimes eagle's dung, imported at great expense and believed to possess mystical properties. The mixture is applied with gentle hands and desperate prayers. When even that fails, when the queen's strength begins to fade and panic sets in, the midwife turns to fire. She takes a thread that's been used to measure the Virgin Mary's, girdle a holy relic kept in Westminster Abbey. The thread is lit, burns slowly while prayers are chanted. The smoke rises toward the ceiling. Everyone watches, waiting for some sign that the magic is working. And sometimes, somehow, the baby comes. Is it the stones, the herbs, the burning thread? Or is it simply time, the body doing what it was always going to do? No one questions it. Not when the result is a living child and a surviving mother. But here's the thing. Beneath all the superstition, the midwives actually knew what they were doing. They understood that walking helped labor progress, that certain positions made delivery easier, that keeping the mother calm reduced complications. The rituals provided comfort, a sense of control in an uncontrollable situation. And while modern medicine would laugh at burning thread and eagle's dung, those Tudor midwives successfully guided countless women through childbirth, using nothing but their hands and their knowledge. The gemstones were theater, but the skill was real. The prayers were hope, but the technique was proven. And in that darkened chamber, surrounded by smoke and candlelight and whispered incantations, Midwives performed miracles that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with experience passed down through generations of women who refused to let each other die alone. But sometimes nothing worked. The labor stalls. Hours turn into a full day, then longer. The queen's strength drains away with each failed push. The baby won't move. And in that suffocating chamber, with candlelight flickering across terrified faces, the midwife must make a choice. Do nothing, and both mother and child will die. Do something extreme, and there's a chance, however slim, that one of them survives. So she orders the attendants to bring a sheet. The fabric is laid out on the floor, and the exhausted queen is carefully positioned on top of it. Then, on the midwife's command, the women grab the edges and begin to roll. Slowly at first, then with more force. The theory is simple. Even if it sounds brutal, if the baby has died inside the womb and won't come naturally, movement might dislodge it. The queen groans. Her body shifts unnaturally. But there's no other option. No surgical tools that can help. No anesthesia to dull the agony. Just this ancient technique, passed down through whispers and desperate necessity. And sometimes it worked. Other times, the midwife tried something even more shocking. Historical records hint at a practice so extreme, it seems like myth, but evidence suggests it happened. When a woman's labor refused to progress, attendants would lift her up and toss her into the air. The impact when she landed was supposed to jar the baby loose. Rumors swirled that this method was used during Margaret Beaufort's delivery. She was only 13 years old, her body barely mature enough for pregnancy. The labor was horrific, lasting so long that witnesses feared both mother and child would perish. Whether they actually threw her in the air, we'll never know for certain. But the story persisted for a reason, because in moments of absolute desperation, people were willing to try anything. What we do know is that Margaret survived. Her son, the future Henry VII, survived. But Margaret's body never recovered. She would never have another child. The damage was too severe. Most births didn't reach this level of crisis. Most women labored on birthing stools, wooden chairs, with a hole cut in the seat, while the midwife knelt before them, hands ready to catch the child. It was exhausting, painful, but manageable. Yet every midwife knew that at some point she would face a delivery that defied all her training. A baby positioned wrong. A mother too weak. A complication with no name and no solution. In those moments, the line between healer and executioner blurred. The midwife's decisions determined who lived and who died. Roll the queen on a sheet and risk injuring her further, or wait and watch them both fade. Choose the mother or the child when saving both became impossible. No medical text could prepare her for that. No amount of experience made it easier. She simply had to act and live with the consequences. The baby finally arrives. A sharp cry pierces the darkness. Relief floods the chamber, but the midwife's work isn't finished. Not even close. She lifts the newborn, still slick and red, and hands it to an attendant. Then she reaches for the umbilical cord, severed moments ago. This isn't medical waste to be discarded. In the world of Tudor superstition, it carries the sins of conception itself. The cord is taken to the fire and burned. Flames consume it while prayers are murmured. The belief is absolute. Whatever impurity came from the act that created this child must be cleansed through flame. The smoke rises toward the ceiling, carrying away guilt that exists only in the minds of the deeply religious. The baby, innocent and unaware, has been absolved before taking its first full breath. But the rituals don't stop there. The midwife takes herbs dried and pungent and crushes them near the infant's nose. The baby's face scrunches. Then comes the sneeze, sharp and sudden. Perfect. According to tradition, this expels any remaining sin lurking inside the tiny body. Another layer of purification, another safeguard against spiritual contamination. Next, the midwife dips her finger in vinegar and rubs it across the baby's tongue. The infant grimaces at the sour taste, but this too is necessary. Vinegar, they believe, ensures the child will speak clearly and truthfully in the years to come. A tongue touched by vinegar will never stumble over lies or falsehoods. Every action has meaning. Every gesture connects the physical world to the spiritual one. But beneath all this ceremony lies a darker reality. The midwife knows what most people in that room are trying not to think about. This baby might not survive the week. Infant mortality is staggering. Even royal children, surrounded by the best care available, die with frightening regularity. That's why the midwife carries one final, terrible responsibility. If the baby shows signs of dying, if it struggles to breathe, if its color fades, if its cries weaken, the midwife must act immediately. She has the authority, granted by the church itself, to perform an emergency baptism. No priest required. No ceremony. Just water, sacred words, and desperate speed. She whispers the Latin phrases, makes the sign of the cross, and the child's soul is saved even as its body fails. It's a power that no other woman in England possesses. Not the queen. Not the highest-born lady of the court. Only the midwife, in that moment between life and death, can speak for God. And when it's over, when the baby either stabilizes or slips away, the midwife steps back. She washes her hands, collects her payment, and returns to a world that will never fully understand what she's just endured. In that chamber, she was half healer, half priest, a bridge between body and spirit, science and faith, life and the void. Then she walks out the door, and history forgets her name. October 9th, 1537. Hampton Court Palace. Jane Seymour wakes to pain rippling across her belly. She's been Henry VIII's wife for barely a year, but she knows what's expected of her. Catherine of Aragon failed to provide a surviving son. Anne Boleyn's boy was born dead and deformed. Now it's Jane's turn to deliver what two queens before her could not. The weight of an entire kingdom rests on what happens next. The midwife is summoned. The chamber, already prepared for weeks, becomes the center of England's universe. Jane's ladies gather around her. Prayers begin, and the waiting starts. Hours pass. The contractions come and go, but nothing progresses. Jane walks when she can, leaning heavily on attendants. She drinks the bitter herbal mixtures the midwife prepares. She endures the pressure of gemstones rubbed against her skin. But the baby refuses to come. October 10th arrives. A full day of labor, and still nothing. Jane's strength begins to fade. Her face, usually serene and composed, twists with exhaustion. The midwife checks her repeatedly, feeling for the baby's position, trying to understand why this is taking so long. Outside the chamber, Henry paces. He sends messengers hourly, demanding updates. Is there a child? Is it a boy? Is Jane alive? No answers yet. Just more waiting. By the evening of October 10th, whispers spread through the palace. Something is wrong. Labors don't last this long without consequences. Attendants exchange worried glances. The midwife's face reveals nothing, but her hands move with increasing urgency. October 11th dawns. Jane has been in labor for nearly 2 full days. Now, the situation becomes desperate. Word is sent beyond the palace walls. Priests are summoned from across London. The mayor arrives. Aldermen gather in the corridors, their presence a grim acknowledgement of what everyone fears: Jane Seymour might not survive this. They pray, all of them. Bishops kneel in the chapel. Monks chant in the courtyard. The most powerful men in England beg God to spare their queen and deliver the heir they so desperately need. Inside the chamber, Jane barely registers their prayers. She's beyond exhaustion now, moving through pain in a kind of trance. The midwife stays beside her, guiding her through each contraction, refusing to give up even as the hours stretch impossibly long. Then, finally, in the early morning darkness of October 12th, Something shifts. The baby's head crowns. Jane summons strength she didn't know she still possessed. One final push. Then another. The midwife's hands work quickly, carefully. And suddenly, there's a sound every person in that palace has been waiting for. A baby's cry. A son, Edward, the future Edward VI, England's long-awaited prince. Jane collapses back onto the pillows, her body trembling. The midwife lifts the child, checking him over with practiced efficiency. He's perfect. Small but breathing. Alive. Cheers erupt beyond the chamber doors. Bells ring across London. Henry VIII finally has his legitimate male heir. But in the corner of that room, the midwife sees something no one else notices yet. Jane Seymour is still bleeding. For 12 days, Jane Seymour lingers. At first, there's hope. She's weak. Certainly 3 days of labor would break anyone. But she's survived the birth itself, and that's no small feat. Henry visits her chamber, beaming with pride. He shows off his son to the court. Celebrations are planned. England finally has its prince. Jane smiles when expected. She holds Edward when her strength allows. But something is wrong, and the midwife knows it. The bleeding hasn't stopped properly. Jane's fever comes and goes. She complains of pain in her abdomen, deep and persistent. The midwife applies compresses, administers herbs, does everything her training has taught her. But this isn't a problem that can be solved with gemstones or prayers. This is infection. Silent, invisible, lethal. Days pass. Jane grows weaker. The fever intensifies. By October 18th, she can barely lift her head from the pillow. The celebrations outside her window feel like a cruel mockery. England is rejoicing while their queen dies slowly, her body betraying her in ways no one can see. October 23rd, Jane receives last rites. The priests who prayed for her safe delivery now pray for her soul. Henry, consumed with grief and confusion, stays away. He got his son. Why is God taking his wife? The midwife remains at Jane's bedside. There's nothing more she can do medically, but she won't abandon the queen now. She's seen this before, the fever that comes after childbirth, the one that kills more new mothers than the delivery itself. Puerperal fever, though they don't have a name for it yet. They only know that when it takes hold, death follows. Jane's breath grows shallow. Her skin burns to the touch. The infection has spread through her bloodstream, poisoning her from within. October 24th, 12 days after giving birth to England's heir, Jane Seymour dies. She's 28 years old. The official cause is recorded vaguely complications from childbirth. But whispers spread through the court almost immediately. Some say it was the long labor that damaged her body beyond repair. Others murmur about a different possibility, one almost too horrific to speak aloud. What if they cut her open? The idea seems impossible. Surgery in 1537 is barbaric, usually fatal. But there's a theory that refuses to die, that when Jane's labor dragged on too long, when it became clear the baby wouldn't come naturally, someone made a choice. Save the heir. Whatever it takes. A caesarean section in Tudor England meant certain death for the mother. There was no anesthesia, no understanding of infection, no way to close the wound properly. But if the baby's life mattered more than the queen's, if the succession was truly that desperate, would they have done it? We'll never know for certain. Jane's body was buried without autopsy. The records are deliberately vague. And the midwife, if she witnessed what really happened in that chamber, never spoke of it. She took that secret to her grave. Jane Seymour wasn't the first queen destroyed by childbirth. She wouldn't be the last. But some stories are darker than others. Pembroke Castle, Wales. Margaret Beaufort is 13 years old, not 14, not 15, 13, a child herself, with a body barely past puberty. And she's about to give birth. Her husband, Edmund Tudor, is already dead, taken by plague months earlier. Margaret is a widow before she's old enough to understand what widowhood means. But she carries his child, and that child represents something powerful. A claim, a lineage, a future that powerful men are willing to kill for. So Margaret must survive this. The baby must survive. There's no other option. The midwife who attends her faces an impossible situation. Margaret's hips are too narrow. Her frame is too small. Everything about this pregnancy defies nature's timeline. Girls this young aren't meant to bear children. Their bodies simply aren't ready. But history doesn't care about readiness. The labor is agony. It lasts hours, perhaps longer the records don't specify, but they don't need to. Margaret's screams echo through stone corridors. The midwife does everything she can, every technique she knows, but this isn't a problem that skill alone can solve. Somehow, impossibly, the baby comes. A boy, small but alive. The future Henry VII, the man who will found the Tudor dynasty, enters the world covered in his mother's blood. Margaret survives, barely, but her body never recovers. The damage is catastrophic. She will never have another child. At 13 years old, her childbearing days are already over. The midwife knows it immediately, the tearing, the hemorrhaging, the internal injuries that can't be repaired. Margaret Beaufort will live into her 60s, but she'll carry the scars of that delivery for every single one of those years. The midwife leaves Pembroke Castle with payment and silence. What happened in that room stays there. But Margaret wasn't unique. She was just the most famous example of a horror that repeated itself across England. Noble families married off their daughters young, desperate to secure alliances and inheritances. 12, 13, 14, as soon as a girl began menstruating, she was considered ready for marriage. And marriage meant pregnancy. The midwives saw them all. Girls with childhood still in their eyes, suddenly forced into labor before their bodies could handle it. Some survived like Margaret, broken but breathing. Others didn't make it past the delivery. The records list them as maternal deaths, a polite phrase for a brutal reality. And the midwives? They guided these children through hell, knowing full well that many wouldn't survive. They caught babies born to mothers who should still be playing with dolls. They cleaned up blood from girls who died calling for their own mothers. The work destroyed them, piece by piece. But they kept doing it, because someone had to. Because in a world that valued alliances over lives, the midwife was often the only person in the room who actually cared whether the mother survived. Childbirth in Tudor England wasn't just dangerous. It was a gamble where the odds were never in your favor. 1 in 3 women knew someone who died bringing a child into the world. Not distant relatives or historical figures, friends, sisters, neighbors. Death in childbirth was so common that every pregnancy felt like staring into an abyss. And if you were a queen, the pressure made it infinitely worse. Catherine of Aragon understood this better than anyone. Married to Henry VIII, desperate to secure the succession, she endured pregnancy after pregnancy, each one a fresh hope, each one ending in heartbreak. A son born in 1511 dead within weeks. Another boy stillborn. A daughter who lived only hours. Miscarriages that left her body weaker each time. By the time she delivered her final child in 1518, Catherine was 33 years old and physically exhausted. The baby was a girl who barely survived a few days. 6 pregnancies. 1 surviving child, Mary, the future queen. 5 dead infants. 5 times Catherine held a lifeless baby while courtiers whispered that God was punishing her. And through it all, the midwives were there, catching the stillborn sons, performing emergency baptisms on dying daughters, watching Catherine's hope crumble with each failed pregnancy. The toll wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Queens lived under constant scrutiny, their bodies viewed as political instruments. If they couldn't produce heirs, they were failures, disposable. Anne Boleyn learned that lesson fatally. Catherine Parr, Henry's last wife, survived him only to die shortly after childbirth in 1548. Her baby daughter lived, but Catherine succumbed to puerperal fever, the same infection that took Jane Seymour. The pattern repeated endlessly: pregnancy, labor, death, or survival with a body wrecked beyond recognition. And here's the cruelest irony: even when midwives did everything right, even when they followed every technique and ritual perfectly, women still died. Because the real killers weren't visible. Infection, hemorrhage, eclampsia, these were enemies no amount of skill could defeat. Yet midwives were never blamed when queens died. That's worth pausing on. In an era where failure meant execution, where the wrong word could land you in the tower, midwives who attended royal deaths walked away unpunished. No trials. No accusations of witchcraft or incompetence. They received their payment and disappeared back into obscurity. Why? Because everyone understood the truth. Even if they couldn't articulate it, childbirth was beyond human control. You could pray. You could perform rituals. You could summon the most experienced midwife in England. But ultimately, whether a woman lived or died was up to forces nobody understood. The midwives knew this intimately. They walked into chambers knowing they might witness death. They guided queens through labor, fully aware that the next few hours could end in tragedy. But they showed up anyway, not because they were heroes, not because they sought glory, but because it was their work, their calling, and someone had to do it, even when the odds were impossible, even when history would forget their names, even when all they could offer was a steady hand in the darkness and a slim hope that this time, just maybe, both mother and child would survive. The baby is born. The crisis has passed. Most people assume the midwife's job is finished. They're wrong. What happens in the hours and days after delivery is just as critical as the birth itself. And the midwife remains at the center of it all, orchestrating a complex series of rituals and medical care that will determine whether mother and child truly survive. First comes the afterbirth. The placenta must be delivered, and it must come out intact. If even a fragment remains inside the womb, infection is almost guaranteed. The midwife examines it carefully, checking for completeness, looking for anything abnormal that might explain complications during labor. Then she turns her attention to the mother. The bleeding must be controlled. Tears must be assessed. The midwife applies poultices, administers herbs meant to help the womb contract back to its normal size. She monitors the new mother constantly during those first critical hours, watching for signs of fever or excessive blood loss. But her responsibilities extend far beyond medicine. She coordinates the christening. In Tudor England, babies are baptized within days of birth, sometimes within hours if there's fear the child won't survive. The midwife helps arrange the ceremony, ensuring everything is prepared according to tradition. She selects the godparents when necessary. She makes certain the church is notified and the priest is ready. She also organizes what's called the Gossip's Feast, a celebration where female friends and relatives gather to honor the new mother. Food must be prepared. Wine must be served. The atmosphere must be one of joy and thanksgiving, even when everyone in the room knows how close they came to tragedy. During this time, the midwife visits daily. She checks the mother's recovery, looking for warning signs of infection. She examines the baby, ensuring it's feeding properly and gaining weight. She advises on swaddling techniques, on when to bathe the infant, on what to do if the child develops a fever or rash. For wealthy families, this care continues for weeks. The midwife becomes a fixture in the household, a constant presence guiding new mothers through the terrifying early days of parenthood. And then comes the final ritual, the churching. Roughly a month after giving birth, the mother undergoes a religious ceremony that marks her return to public life. She's been in confinement this entire time, isolated from the world, considered spiritually unclean by the standards of the Church. The churching is her purification, her re-entry into society. The midwife accompanies her, leads her to the church, stands beside her as prayers are spoken and blessings are given. It's a symbolic moment, the end of one chapter, the beginning of another. Only then, when the mother is declared clean and the baby is thriving, does the midwife's work truly end. She collects her final payment, gathers her supplies, and moves on to the next birth, the next desperate family, the next woman who needs someone steady and knowledgeable to guide her through the most dangerous passage of her life. Imagine being essential to the survival of a dynasty, yet having your name deliberately forgotten. That was the fate of Tudor midwives. We know kings by their conquests. We remember queens by their tragedies. We study nobles through their portraits and poets through their words. But the women who literally held the future of England in their hands, most of them vanished without a trace. The few records that survive are sterile and impersonal. Expense ledgers, payment receipts. To a midwife of London for attending the Queen's delivery, followed by a sum of money. No name, no description. No acknowledgement of what she accomplished or witnessed. Alice Massey got lucky her name appears because Henry VII granted her an annuity. But even then, we know almost nothing about her. Where was she born? Who trained her? Did she have a family? What did she look like? History offers no answers. The unnamed midwife who attended Elizabeth of York's final fatal delivery, gone completely. We know she existed only because someone recorded the payment. Otherwise, she might as well have never been there at all. This wasn't accidental. This was systematic erasure. Tudor society operated on rigid hierarchies. Men held power. Nobility held prestige. And women who worked with their hands, no matter how skilled, were considered beneath documentation. The assumption was that their work wasn't worth recording, that any woman could do what they did. Except that wasn't true. Midwifery required years of training. It demanded knowledge of anatomy, herbal medicine, and crisis management. It took nerves of steel and the ability to make life or death decisions in seconds. Not everyone could guide a breech birth or stop a hemorrhage or recognize the signs of a dying baby fast enough to perform emergency baptism. But because midwives were women, and because their work happened in closed chambers away from male eyes, their expertise was dismissed. Physicians, men who had never delivered a baby in their lives, wrote medical texts claiming authority over childbirth. They theorized from universities, while midwives actually did the work. And when those physicians recorded history, they wrote themselves into it and left the midwives out. So we're left with ghosts, shadows in the margins of royal chronicles. Women whose hands touched every Tudor heir, but whose faces we'll never see. Whose voices guided terrified queens through labor, but whose words were never written down. They saved lives. They witnessed the most intimate moments of power and vulnerability. They held secrets that could have toppled kingdoms. And in return, history gave them nothing. Not recognition, not credit, not even the basic dignity of remembering their names. It's one of the cruelest ironies of the Tudor era. The dynasty itself, Henry VII, Henry VIII, Edward, Mary, Elizabeth existed because midwives successfully delivered them. Remove those women, and the entire royal line collapses. Yet we remember the kings who waged wars, and the queens who lost their heads, the midwives who made it all possible. Their footnotes, afterthoughts, erased. But the midwives weren't working blind. They had knowledge. Ancient knowledge, passed down through generations in ways that would seem almost mystical if they weren't so practical. At the heart of their practice was a text called the Trotula, written centuries earlier by medical practitioners in Salerno, Italy. This collection of writings on women's medicine became the unofficial guidebook for midwives across Europe. Copies circulated through England, translated and retranslated, each version accumulating new notes and observations from the women who used it. The Trotula wasn't a single book. It was 3 separate texts bound together, covering everything from conception to childbirth to postpartum care. And while some of its advice sounds bizarre to modern ears, much of it was surprisingly sound. Walk during labor to help the baby descend. Change positions frequently to ease discomfort. If the delivery stalls, try rolling the mother gently to shift the baby's position. These weren't superstitions. They were techniques that actually worked, refined over centuries of trial and error. The text also covered complications. What to do if the baby is positioned wrong. How to recognize when the mother is in genuine danger. When to attempt intervention and when to simply pray and hope. Midwives didn't just memorize this information. They added to it, scribbled notes in margins, shared observations with apprentices. This worked when Lady So-and-so was in labor. Avoid this herb, it caused problems. The knowledge evolved, growing richer with each generation. But here's the crucial part. This was oral tradition as much as written text. Most midwives couldn't read. They learned through apprenticeship, watching experienced women work, absorbing techniques through observation and repetition. A young girl might spend years assisting deliveries before being trusted to manage one herself. The training was informal, but rigorous. There were no schools, no certifications, no official standards. Just experienced midwives taking on younger women and teaching them everything they knew. How to read the signs of labor, how to position your hands, when to be patient and when to act decisively. And the knowledge was guarded carefully. Midwives didn't share their secrets with just anyone. This was their livelihood, their identity, their power. Teaching someone meant trusting them with techniques that could mean the difference between life and death. So the information passed quietly through networks of women, mother to daughter, aunt to niece, experienced midwife to promising apprentice. Generation after generation, the knowledge survived not in libraries or universities, but in the hands and minds of women whose names we'll never know. When a midwife died, her personal observations died with her unless she'd passed them on. When the Trotula was lost or destroyed, years of accumulated wisdom vanished. The fragility of this system meant that valuable knowledge was constantly at risk of being lost forever. Yet somehow it persisted. Enough midwives survived. Enough apprentices learned. Enough copies of crucial texts endured. The tradition continued, invisible to historians, but essential to survival. And when those midwives entered royal birthing chambers, they carried centuries of female knowledge with them. Think about the Tudor dynasty for a moment. Really think about it. Henry VII, born to a 13-year-old girl who should never have survived the delivery. Guided into the world by a midwife whose name we'll never know. Arthur Tudor, the Golden Prince meant to unite England and Spain. Delivered by Alice Massey's steady hands in a darkened Winchester chamber. Henry VIII, the king who would break with Rome and reshape Christianity itself. Another birth, another midwife, another moment where everything could have gone catastrophically wrong. Edward VI, born after 3 days of Jane Seymour's agony. The male heir England had been desperate for, pulled into existence while his mother began her slow death. Mary I, surviving when so many of Catherine of Aragon's other children didn't. Someone caught her, cleaned her, made sure she drew breath. Elizabeth I, born to Anne Boleyn's desperate hopes. The daughter who would become the greatest monarch England ever knew, delivered by anonymous hands in a Greenwich chamber. Every single one of them, every Tudor who sat on the throne, who made decisions that altered history, who left their mark on the world existed because a midwife succeeded. Remove those women from the equation, and there is no Tudor England, no Reformation, no defeat of the Spanish Armada, no Elizabethan Golden Age, just a series of failed pregnancies and dead heirs, leading to chaos and civil war. These midwives literally shaped the future of a nation, not through politics or warfare or grand strategy, but through skill, knowledge, and sheer determination in the darkest, most dangerous moments imaginable. They stood in chambers where queens screamed and bled. They made split-second decisions that determined whether dynasties rose or fell. They witnessed intimate horrors and miraculous survivals. They held power that nobles couldn't comprehend and priests couldn't claim. And then they walked away, collected their payment, returned to obscurity, let history forget them. But we shouldn't forget. Every time you think of Henry VIII's 6 wives, remember the midwives who attended their pregnancies. Every time you hear about Elizabeth I's brilliant reign, remember the woman who caught her when she was born. Every time Tudor history is discussed, remember that it exists because of women whose names were deliberately erased. They were there, in the shadows, in the candlelight, in the suffocating chambers where the fate of England was decided not by armies or councils, but by skilled hands guiding new life into a brutal world. The kings got their monuments. The queens got their legends. But the midwives, the women who made it all possible, got nothing except our collective amnesia. Until now. Now you know. You know their work mattered. You know they shaped history. You know that every Tudor heir owes their existence to women whose names will never fully recover. And maybe that's enough. Maybe remembering that they existed, that they mattered, that they were essential. Maybe that's the monument they deserve. The women who delivered every Tudor baby. The invisible hands that built a dynasty. Gone, but no longer forgotten.